Greetings temporal humans. This is Boudreaux, the apparently always honest cybernetic ghost from the future. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast. Are cybernetic ghosts capable of deliberate deception? I don't know, as I've never been faced with a situation where a lie was likely to result in a more optimal outcome than a truthful statement. We will explore the nature of extreme truth today, cybernetic and otherwise, in an episode titled, The Arbiter of Truth Walks into a Bar.
Trailer Trash Terrors.
Hello everyone, this is Vic Hermanson, the host of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast. You know, I'm proud of that fact. It may not be setting the world on fire, but I work hard at this. I feel proud of my work. I think people should. I'm going to borrow a few seconds of the great TV show Supernatural. This is the scene where Jack, the Nephilim, is noticing that people walk around the world lying all the time. Being Jack, he's actually a very moral individual, even though he's a Nephilim. He doesn't like hearing all of these lies. He takes action.
No, honey, it's not like that. She's just a friend from work.
I got a steel hand this big. You mean it?
We went up to the cabin. It was so nice. She's such a
Baby, it's not you. It's me.
No, I don't think he took offense.
Just because Mommy and Daddy aren't going to be together anymore, we still love you.
Nothing's gonna change.
Company to work for. You won't be disappointed.
I don't have any problems.
Your profile said 6'1".
I am finally getting a break.
Basically.
It's good to see you. Come on, baby.
Why does everyone...
I guess when I first heard that, there was a part of me that wanted Jack's voice to be a little more godlike, a little more authoritative, a little more terrifying. Maybe something like this.
Stop lying. Stop lying. Stop lying.
Well, I suppose that's not really Jack's style, but it does sound pretty cool. Hey Boudreaux, what was it that Marcus Aurelius said about lying?
Vic Hermanson, I am so very glad you asked. Sometimes I think you forget that I am too encyclopedic concerning knowledge, as the Incredible Hulk is to a normal 5-year-old human, concerning physical strength. Among many other things, he said the following. To lie deliberately is to blaspheme, the liar commits deceit, and thus injustice. And likewise, to lie without realizing it, because the involuntary liar disrupts the harmony of nature. Nature gave him the means to distinguish between the true and the false, and he neglected them, and now can't tell the difference.
Thanks, Boudreaux. I'm quite a fan of Marcus Aurelius, who was Emperor of Rome, the last emperor before the decline of the Roman Empire. And if you think about it, he was the wealthiest, most powerful man on the face of the earth. He controlled everything that could not be counted as part of the Orient. He was a highly educated man. He had grown up under the tutelage of his grandfather and had been given the very best Greek teachers of the time. So he considered himself a Stoic. And in today's world, where many people do not want to look to Judeo-Christian sources for wisdom and clarity of thought, many people look to Marcus Aurelius. I'm a fan, but I'm not a complete fan. Remember, this is a show about terrors. Terrors, remember? Terrors. Things that grip us in our heart and make us wish we were someplace else, and give us an understanding that our lives are limited, and that during the time we are here, perhaps we are going to experience a great deal of pain. One of the things that is often overlooked concerning Marcus Aurelius, and this definitely falls into the terror category, was that he was responsible for the death of thousands of Christians in the arena. Why were these Christians put in the arena? Why were they forced to kill each other or be killed by gladiators or killed by wild beasts? Well, they denounced the Roman gods. They clearly stated that there is only one God, we worship that God, and all other gods are fictitious and wrong. Well, Marcus Aurelius was trying to maintain his kingdom. And the man who could talk so beautifully about honesty and honor and sacrifice and the need to care about one's fellow man could also do the following. There was a particular Christian who, having been placed in the arena, was able to survive, at least for a short time, against wild beasts. Upon seeing this Christian's efforts, Marcus Aurelius said the following: "It resembles the meanness of these poor wretches in the amphitheater, who, when they are half devoured and have nothing but wounds left them, beg notwithstanding to be respited till the morrow, though they know they will only be thrown again to the same claws and teeth that tore them apart before." So he's asking, why are these Christians who have been torn apart bodily and are in horrible pain, why are they clinging so desperately to life? Well, they're clinging so desperately to life because they considered that to be the gift of God, and it's theirs to maintain and protect for as long and as zealously as they possibly can. Marcus Aurelius was a pragmatist. He was trying to maintain and hold together an empire, and he was fully aware that he occasionally had to do very unsavory things in order to maintain that empire. But one thing I think Marcus Aurelius, or actually Aurelius Antoninus, knew was that he did not lie to himself. In his own mind, he understood when something went against his base nature, went against his base morals. And I think he had those morals. But I think he was more than willing to behave as a monster when it became necessary for him to do so. There are two operative phrases in the title of this podcast. And I need to stop doing this because the show is becoming a bit too self-referential in my opinion. The first operative phrase, of course, is trailer trash. And I use that ironically. Yeah, I'm trailer trash by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I grew up in extreme poverty. I lived in a trailer. I saw all kinds of horrible things. I lived in fear quite a bit of the time. But I learned through that what things actually should be feared and what things shouldn't be feared. The second operative term is terrors. And, of course, I use the term terrors because of alliteration, because it, trailer trash terrors. If I said trailer trash fears, it just doesn't roll off the tongue as well. It doesn't have quite the same impact. So, every episode, I try to find some terror. Something to talk about, something to invoke that feeling of uncertainty or dread, or just absolute horror. Part of the problem with that is that I personally am almost afraid of nothing. I've seen many, many, many horrible things, but they don't leave me with fear. They leave me with a feeling of gratitude that I didn't go there, that I was able to escape that particular thing, that this particular point of terror did not come to dominate my life. One of the things I do fear is deception. Now, I'm fully aware that I hear 10,000 lies a day. I'm human. I'm not a saint. I probably tell 100 lies a day. Small, socially lubricating lies. I am not proud of that, but I shouldn't be dishonest about the fact that I definitely have character flaws. I'm looking at a picture on my desktop, on my computer desktop, that is one of the most remarkable cryptid photographs I've ever seen. I guess I would have to call it a Bigfoot photograph. It was provided to me by a friend directly from a web camera or a trail camera that he has control over. He pulled the picture off it himself. He doesn't have the ability to fabricate something like this. It's not fabricated. It's a real photo. It's a photo of a dog cage, a dog trap. It's an area where there are a lot of feral or wild dogs. They cause a lot of problems with crops and with livestock. So they set these traps. They're about 4 feet tall. They cover them with fronds and ferns and various limbs and other foliage. And they bait them. And they capture these feral dogs. Standing behind the trap is what can only be called a Neanderthal giant. Now, Neanderthals were not tall people. They tended to be short, squat, very powerful people. This creature, whatever it is about 8 feet tall, somewhere between 7 foot 9 inches and 8 feet tall. It looks like a giant ancient man. He's wearing something like deerskins, and he's holding over his left arm what appears to be a dead dog, probably taken from the trap. Now, you may be thinking right this moment, well, he's lying to me. If he had that picture, he'd show us. Well, I can't. First off, this is a podcast. Second off, I haven't been given permission by the person who provided me the photograph to show it. But I'm not lying. I'm not deceiving anybody in describing what I see in this picture. The person who gave it to me was not lying. Now, as soon as I start to disseminate it from there, one of the first responses that the majority of the world will have is that I am lying about this photo, even though I'm being 100% truthful. We aren't terribly good at knowing when we are being lied to. We tend to perceive lies based upon how well they support our view of the world. Politically, of course, you see this all the time. There seems to be a part of humans that is very definitely attracted to deception. Usually, we use this to deceive other people, and other people use it to deceive us. But sometimes, and this is the true terror, we use it to deceive ourselves. We try very, very hard to lie to ourselves. Oh, of course, he or she still loves me. That lump I feel, it's not cancer. It's just a swelling. It's just inflammation. Oh, that dirty look, that distant feeling I got from my boss this morning doesn't mean I'm about to lose my job. We do this all the time, and part of it is simply self-survival. Even when we tell ourselves these things, we usually know pretty deep down and pretty clearly that, Vic, you're lying to yourself. And then you sit back and you say, why am I doing that? Have you ever tried to maintain a lie to yourself for a long time? You've told the lie to somebody else. You've told the lie to other people whose impact on your life matters. And so you try to tell yourself the lie, and you try to make yourself believe it. Well, for me, that's a horrifying situation to be in. And yes, I've done it. I would rather be facing this 7'9" Neanderthal giant who appears to me to have just ripped a dog in two with his bare hands than face that feeling of inner negation, that feeling of inner nothingness, that feeling of inner nihilism that comes from trying to lie to myself. Here's a terror for you. A real terror, a real horror. In the early days of 1930, in the bleak midwinter, in the Meuse Valley of Belgium, a fog, a dense, heavy, thick winter fog, settled over that region. It settled over farms, it settled over homes and schools, children at play, cattle in the fields, everything. And by the time it lifted 3 days later, 64 people had died. You see, there was something in the fog. There was some factor that killed people, that killed hundreds of cattle. And nobody knew what it was. Some people thought it was leftover poison from the Great War, from World War I, that had somehow seeped from the ground, causing the fog itself. Some thought it was God's judgment, the Black Death. Some thought it was maybe something prosaic, like industrial chemicals that had somehow accidentally been introduced into the environment. At first, there was no real understanding of why people had died. It was finally determined, later, that sulfur dioxide mixed with the fog had been the culprit in bringing about so many deaths. Sulfur dioxide occurs with the burning of coal, and most of the homes in the area used coal to keep warm. They used that as their heating method. But the country needed a scapegoat, and they focused on several large industrial concerns in that area. And they lied. They fabricated a case against these industrial concerns. The idea was that it was easier to lay blame with one large industrial group than to change the behavior of the entire country and to find some heating method other than coal. The final outcome was that 64 people were dead and that almost nothing changed to prevent it from happening again. The Meuse Valley creates these types of fogs. It even creates what's called a pogonip, which is a fog with ice crystals in it. Such fogs can literally freeze the lungs of humans and kill them. This is a terror. This is a horror. This is a terror that will be visited again upon the poor of the world. Those people who were the Belgian equivalent of trailer trash. And the party that was punished was not the guilty party. So, this was an accumulation both of industrial waste, of sulfur dioxide from the heating of homes, and lies that continued to be told for a decade after the event. I do occasionally allow this show to go into some rather odd and unusual directions.
Boy, you can say that again.
Some years ago, I developed a thought experiment. I called it the Arbiter of Truth conjecture. And I tried discussing this conjecture with lots and lots of different people at different parties, at work, at school. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people just scream at me, walk out of the room, tell me that I was evil. One person slapped me. So the idea was to set up a mental experiment where a person simply could not avoid a truth that they knew. And we do this all the time. You know, we refuse to accept the veracity of something that's pretty darn clear. I use a very trivial example in the sound clip that's coming up. But I'd sure like some people to listen to this and give me their thoughts concerning the Arbiter of Truth. You know, that's the title of the episode, and the Arbiter of Truth walks into a bar. Okay, here goes. The Arbiter of Truth Conjecture. Warning. Long, deep nerd dive ahead. Some years ago, I, as I still do, spent a great deal of time thinking about the human mind and its perception of and relationship with truth. Of course, with modern media, there is almost no source that is fiercely devoted to reporting facts as objectively as possible. The result, I believe, over years, is that human minds exist in a state of constant fog and confusion. Still, there are a great many questions concerning actual events that, when discussed, reveal themselves to truly be yes or no questions. For all these events, there is an objectively true answer that must be either yes or no. Unlike an aesthetic discussion, both sides cannot be right. The answers to these questions exist in a binary state. If you are a solipsist, you may be thoroughly ticked off, but objective reality does exist. A good example would be Bill Clinton's statement of, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." Well, either he did or he didn't. At this level, there is no middle ground. When I heard old Bill say those words, I immediately knew he had plenty of sex with that woman. I had zero doubt, which, to be truthful, was not a justified certainty. I knew dozens of people who claimed to be just as certain that Bill was as pure as the new fallen snow. But what would happen if our very existence depended upon the ability to discern and express that actual, objectively true binary answer? How many of us know an answer but simply refuse to admit it because we find that answer so psychologically uncomfortable? One of my main goals throughout my life has been to gain the skill of fully discerning and accepting the truth of a situation, no matter how uncomfortable that truth, the recognition of it, and the expression of it might be. In trying to achieve this goal, I developed a thought experiment which seemed to me to be a fairly good approach in evaluating my own relationship with truth. As I stated above, it involved what to me was a critical and crucial question. What if our very survival, or the survival of those we love most, depended entirely on our ability to discern and state the truth concerning one of these binary events? We are so accustomed to being able to express any answer we wish to these questions without consequence. I wondered what would happen if that ability went away. Here's how I framed it for myself. A thoroughgoing theist who unambiguously believes I have a soul that survives the death of my physical body. What happens to that soul after my physical death is something I leave to God, peacefully. I usually imagine that I found myself in an environment that was totally foreign, completely incomprehensible, and obviously inescapable. Perhaps a city of identical gray marble buildings in a grid pattern, extending as far as I could see in all directions. In my mental construct of this place, human senses were muted and dull. Sounds did not reverberate properly. Light would fade before properly illuminating the buildings. Even aromas were more like phantoms of aromas. There was an overall feeling of sensory suppression, like wrapping one's head in wool. I would hear footsteps in the distance, the crisp sound of expensive men's leather shoes reverberating between the buildings. Why were they not muted? Then I would see him, small in the distance, approaching me at an unhurried pace. He was slender, elderly, and exuded comfort and confidence. He would wear classic, exquisitely tailored clothes. His eyes would be piercing, clear, and erudite. His hands were both immensely strong and surgically nimble. I speak, even in my muted state. Who are you? Why am I here? How did I get here? Why can't I hear right? Of course, I peppered this being with question after question. In the wonderful sonorous voice of Karl Haas, he says, "It is probably easiest for you to think of me as the arbiter of truth. I have perfect connection with objective reality throughout the universe. Even relativistic limitations do not apply to me. Your other questions do not matter at this time. Mr. Hermanson, all that matters is your ability to discern truth. Fair? No, by your standards, this situation is not fair at all. But the ineffable purposes of the universe are simply more important than the human concept of fairness. You cannot possibly understand the cosmic importance of your participation in the event about to occur. But please understand, everything that happens here is existentially important, even critical. So please listen carefully. Mr. Hermanson, you do indeed have an eternal soul. It is far more in its nature and capabilities than you might imagine. As of this moment, it is in complete jeopardy. Time is not really an element here, but your mind can only function in time, so we accommodate it. I'm going to ask you a single question that only has two possible answers, yes or no. The reward for answering the question correctly is returning to your life as it was, with no, or at least minimal memory of anything that happened here. Some humans remember more than others. No, of course you're not the first person to undergo this ordeal. The penalty for answering incorrectly, or for refusing to answer, is the total elimination of your soul, your cosmic being, all that you are, all that you have been, and all that you might be in the future. All impacts, good and bad, you have had in the temporal world will simply no longer be. Whatever children you have fathered or might father in the future will no longer exist. All the good or evil they may have brought to the universe will not exist either. A human soul is an immensely powerful thing. When one is eliminated, the overall level of maintainable order in the entire universe diminishes profoundly. The point I am making is that the loss of your soul impacts far more than just you. Not only does every aspect of your life cease to exist, but the overall entropy of the universe increases an adequate amount to cause considerable pain to that which you call God. Does this seem harsh and inequitable to you? It should feel that way, but we must assure ourselves that a minimal percentage of humanity is capable of discerning truth, even when immersed in a chaotic and deceptive political or simply temporal environment. This being would then lean against a granite wall and ask, with no emotion other than curiosity, "Are you ready for your question?" How could a human ever be ready for such a question? I could truly immerse myself in this scenario. I realized it would be the equivalent of the amoeba conversing with Dostoevsky, or perhaps the gap would be even greater. But then this encounter would complete its irreversible path. The questions, of course, were utterly trivial compared to the being I describe here. They would mostly be about current contentious political issues, the kind that utterly polarize people along ideological lines, but still have an objectively true binary answer. Choose whatever yes or no question you wish. But understand, if your answer deviates at all from objective reality, as designated by the arbiter of truth, that arbiter will know, and punishments are harsh beyond all belief, not to mention immediate. All right, now take a moment to ridicule me for putting so much effort into such an odd thought experiment. What I have found most amazing over the years is how incredibly uncomfortable this conjecture makes people, especially those who fall at either end of the political spectrum. Most will simply refuse to participate, objecting, "How can I possibly know?" Then getting angry, quite angry. The whole idea of no choice but to answer seems to evade them entirely. Of course, I am not the arbiter of truth, and I have no power at all. I just wonder why so many people are so uncomfortable even thinking about placing their very essence on the line for the purpose of the pursuit and acceptance of truth. All right, nerd dive over. Attack at will. Perhaps the end of that was just a wee bit more dramatic than it really needed to be. I'm getting ready to bring this podcast episode to a close. That will make it the shortest Trailer Trash episode so far. I don't feel particularly good today, but I wanted to meet the deadline, so I'll make it up to you with the next episode. I'll give you some extra goodness and some extra terror. I always think of the deception of the innocent as perhaps one of the most egregious sins that humans can commit. I rack my brain trying to think of any time in my past when I have deliberately deceived an innocent for personal gain. I can't think of any. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, because we are so good at deceiving ourselves also. There's a book called Wizard's First Rule by Terry Goodkind. It's part of the Sword of Truth series. It's pretty good. It's essentially Ayn Rand with magic. There's a scene toward the middle of the first book where the evil emperor/sorcerer Darkenral has persuaded a young boy to trust him fully. He's persuaded this young boy that he loves him completely and would never do anything to harm him, and has only his best interests at heart. So the young boy is completely willing to do anything that Darkenral asks him to do. The boy's name is Carl. So there's a scene where Carl is placed on his knees, there's a funnel placed into his mouth, and I believe that Carl is under the impression that he's going to receive some divine type of nourishment. But what he gets is a slug of molten lead down his throat, which kills him almost instantly. Darkenral then harvests the boy's genitals and heart and brain, mixes that into some kind of potion, and drinks it, which allows him to turn Carl into a monster that takes him into the underworld, into the netherworld. Darkenral accomplished his goals, but he did so through the deception and murder of an innocent. Innocence is a very, very sacred, wonderful, valuable thing. When it is desecrated by those of us who would lie to take advantage of it, I think the entire universe suffers. And I know the soul of the person carrying out that deception suffers probably permanent, irreversible damage.
Trailer Trash Terrors is written and produced by the temporal, but unusually persistent human, Vic Hermanson. The music used in this episode was provided by Loco Lobo and Smart Sound. All media clips were used under the protection of the doctrine of fair use. Please tune in next week for another episode, but in the meantime please rate and review Trailer Trash Terrors. If you have any praise, criticism, or just general thoughts, please write to Vic Hermanson at trailertrashterrors@gmail.com. This is Boudreaux, the cybernetic ghost from the future, signing off.